Hello, and welcome to the FlowRy Show. On this show, we talk about where generations intertwine, sharing stories, insights, and dreams. Whether you are a seasoned sage or a curious young mind, we are all students in the grand classroom of life. Join my co-host, Mike Ryan, and I, Nicole Flowers, as we explore a tapestry woven with threads of collaboration, dreams, and lessons learned along the way. As you know, on the show, we like to bring in our various subject matter experts. And today we have John Kirksey, and we're very honored to have him, a distinguished leadership consultant, diversity expert, and author of Hope Lives Between Us. John brings decades of experience working with Fortune 100 companies on organizational transformation and has been a powerful voice for inclusive leadership across generations. And I must share a personal note. I met John very earlier in my career when I was a budding manager and entering new leadership roles, and he was very instrumental earlier in my career. So, John, it's wonderful seeing you again, and it's a pleasure and honor for us to have you on the FlowRy Show today.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see one of my former mentees with such a elevated position in life and doing some really good things. So good to see you, and good to see you, Mike.
Great to meet you, John. I've been fortunate to, and Nicole knows this, and viewers that watch this show, I've been fortunate to have great mentors. And most, believe it or not, were females that were ahead of their time because of glass ceilings and doors. And my mom was an instrumental part in my parents, because they were entrepreneurs. But the other thing is that I mentor folks for the past 30 years, whether they were older than me or younger than me, that didn't look like me. So they didn't have the same gender. They didn't have the same zip code. They didn't have the same pigmentation. So whether they are in, Africa, or they're in, the US, or they're, in Singapore, or, the Philippines, I've always been blessed to have great mentorship, and I feel it's an obligation to that continues. And I thank you for setting Nicole on a pathway, because I know what that takes, providing just the few minutes we talked before, your calm, personality of guiding her career, that she's been so successful. And, I always say that, I know you're more of an HR type background, but I always say that people don't recognize talent. And when I met Nicole probably 2 years ago now, I recognized her talent, and a little bit of seed of what you gave to her is there. So thank you on behalf of our viewers for, taking the time to mentor Nicole so early in her career.
Well, it's interesting that when you talk about mentoring, and the person who you mentor does not necessarily need to look like you. And quite often there's value in mentoring people who don't look like you. I happen to have been the beneficiary early on in my career when I was a young man, first getting started in human resources at one of the corporations in Chicago. I was 25 years old, and a white senior vice president who headed human resources took me and a young white guy who was also 25 under his wings, put us into significant positions. I started out in compensation and benefits. He rotated me through learning and development, and ended up putting me eventually into executive placement. One of the people who, and he groomed us as equals. By the way, the senior vice president was the white guy from Alabama.
There you go. At that time, which was more than 5 years ago, John, we'll just say.
Yes. It was over 55 years ago.
Like I say, our gray hair doesn't necessarily show it.
Right. But it got me started in a way that I couldn't have started if he hadn't looked at me as someone who was deserving, even though I didn't look like him. And I had the opportunity since not only to mentor Nicole, but to mentor a young Jewish man who worked for me in the Washington, D.C. area when I was there, who eventually became president of one of the major Jewish organizations in the country. I mentored a young Malaysian woman, Chinese Malaysian, who is now in a very significant position at Northwestern University. And I could go on, but
sure,
Mike, and what you said is absolutely true. It doesn't matter what the person looks like. It's what you can invest in them and what you can see come out.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to talent, and part of our thesis on this is intergenerational understanding, especially now with the you got to say this word in every presentation, AI, right? And how we'll be replaced by AI, and we'll all end up like Wall-E, the movie where everyone's on a big ship and fat and happy and watching TV. But I think because of the experience that you went through by having this, and part of the places I've lived have been the South. I was born in D.C., which is below the Mason-Dixon line, but to know what was going on even in the 60s and 70s, or especially in the 60s or 70s, with riots, with bombings, with lynchings and stuff like that, to have someone like that saw you and another gentleman, he recognized talent, right? And so, or the core that was there as a talent, and that's what you saw in Nicole, and I see in people like that you mentioned all over the world, that give them an opportunity, because I've been blessed to have many opportunities and have other people recognize me early in my career, but and then have the obligation to have payback or play it forward, right? So I think that really hits upon what you have done throughout your career, and I call it a servant leader, right? And
Right.
mentorship, and people say, what's that mean? I said, well, you could get biblical or faith-based or whatever, but it means that it's not the hierarchy, right? It's not a militaristic point. It's really, how can I serve others? And to put Sydney in there, how do you serve with love, right?
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned about leadership and organizational change across generations, that's one of the areas that I have great interest in, because leadership is something that is very different from management. It's
Right.
not the top-down management.
Yeah.
Right.
And I always tell people you can only lead if others wish to follow. Leadership is not top-down. It's about translating your vision into a visceral image that is so compelling to others that they adopt it as their own. Sort of a shared vision for the organization. One of the examples I often use with people is in 1961, John F. Kennedy said that we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. 1969.
And bring them back alive.
And bring them back. That's a wonderful point.
Key point, John.
Bring them back. And it's interesting. A number of years ago, I had a chance to spend about a week with the guy who was mission control for NASA when they put a man on the moon. He was 26 years old when he did that. And he said at 26 years old, he did the most important thing he would ever do in his life. So we talk about cross-generational leadership. That's one of the things that made that moonshot possible. Kennedy was 43 years old when he said, we will do this. By the time they put a man on the moon in 1969, he was no longer alive. President Kennedy had been dead for almost 6 years at that point.
Right.
But the shared vision that he had developed for the organization was so powerful that he didn't have to be there to lead it. He
Right.
had to create the vision that others were willing to follow. One of the stories that I love about that moonshot is that there was a janitor who worked at NASA, and some reporters were there talking to people at NASA about what they did. And when they asked this gentleman, "What is your job?" he said, "My job is to put a man on the moon."
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that's great.
Right.
It's a,
The team effort, right? It's not a one-man show. It's the collective mind power and hands-on of everyone. And to that point, John, when we look at building cross-generational understanding, because like you said, the janitor was in it, everyone had vested interest.
Right.
How do you help leaders overcome the natural resistance that can occur when we're trying to implement cross-generational changes, transformation in organization to build that common understanding?
Yeah. Part of it is to realize that everyone is bringing something to the table. And we mentioned my book earlier on. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that we are not apart from each other. We are part of each other. And regardless of whether you are 22 years old or whether you're 62 years old, you're bringing something to the table that helps to complete that puzzle. And unless that puzzle is completed with all the different parts, no one of us can be completed. And leaders in organizations, whether they're younger or older, need to understand that by not utilizing any of the talents that provide novelty in the organization based on different experiences, different viewpoints, different needs of individuals in the organization, you can get things done that are actually phenomenal. And there was one organization, one of the major banking organizations in the country, Chase Manhattan. I was a consultant with them when I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I remember I was working with one group that had a number of older people who had been there for 25, 30 years, others who were new to the organization. And there was some tension within the group. And once I got them to understand that some of the younger people brought some technical skills that some of the older people didn't quite have, the older people brought some institutional knowledge, some wisdom, some experience that the younger people didn't bring. By working together and getting together with each other in teams to accomplish a particular thing, they could do much more than if you only had the older people, only had the younger people on the team.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, and I will listen to your book. I'm severe dyslexic, but hopefully it's on Audible, so I'm looking forward to listening.
Actually, it's not on Audible.
That's all right. I'll have my brother read it to me or something.
Okay. But it is on the ebook.
Okay.
No, one of the people who encouraged me to write the book because of things that I talked to him about over the years. He happened to have been a senior vice president with with Ralph Lauren.
Oh, wow.
But over the years, I had sort of mentored him, and he said, "You've got to put these things into a book."
Right.
So the book sort of boils down if you read the book, you'll know me.
Okay.
And you'll know.
I will try to read it. The last book I for full disclosure, the last book I actually read was right here. If you can't see it, My American Journey by Colin Powell.
Right.
And I'm blessed that he's a fellow GW alum. But more importantly, my sister, who was here this week, she worked for Colin at America's Promise for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And so, talk about a leader, a servant leader. Yes. That he did. A man that also grew up in a certain part of New York. He spoke Yiddish, and basically part of the Jewish culture, obviously the African American Black culture as well.
Right.
But so we can all learn from each other. And one last thing, because we were talking about moonshot, and I always put the blur between my professional and personal life. But when I was growing up, I was there. I did watch was it July 21st? I always get the number wrong, of 1969, with our family sitting around watching the, I think it may have been color TV, but more than likely it was black and white TV, and really grainy and stuff like that. So we watched Neil, step, and we saw Buzz came later. Buzz is still alive. Buzz is my mom's age. He's 95, he's 96 soon. But Michael Collins was our neighbor in growing up. And so I'd jog at the beach with Michael on the beach of, Bethany Beach for years. But there's a famous thing, because I also was in healthcare, and talking about digital, and how you have people who are, digital mavericks and all this other stuff, is that, there's famous saying, Michael, was the loneliest man in the world because he didn't go on the moon, right? There's, I think, a song about that, right? When Buzz and Neil were on the moon, Mike, had the command module, going around the thing. But one thing that happened after they got safely back into the capsule, Mike ripped off all his telemetry. And there was a famous saying, is that Houston called and said, Neil, we've got a problem. We don't have Michael's readings. And Mike famously said, I'll tell you when I stop breathing. So, to make it a segue, bringing the different talents, as you said, people who are, let's just say, older in an organization, which, John, I'd like to get your take on this, because, it's not like also my sister worked for Edwards Deming, who basically worked with Japan after World War II and rebuilding it. And you go to Japan, I think it's still true, and you can sometimes work for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. My grandfather worked for the Atlanta Constitution for 50 years, but you don't necessarily work for people for 30 years. And with the gig economies, you're lucky if you stay for a year or two. So I'd like to maybe give some of your expertise on where you think we are and where you think we're going, and then how, especially during COVID, we lost that connection, I think, between the sage, let's give them credit, we'll say everyone who's over the age of a certain amount is influenced on someone who's in their 20s or 30s. But as during COVID, we lost that because we were on Zoom, and I know folks at Zoom, I love it and all that, but that hallway interaction of intergenerational, involvement, interaction, not non-management thing, but really leadership by servant was lost for a few years. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Excuse me. I'm not really clear on where it's going to go. I know that Mike and I talked a little bit earlier about my son's an AI engineer with also a PhD AI engineer, but also has a master's in economics and undergraduate.
USC film?
Yeah, in film. But I think you're finding more and more of the younger people have a multitude of skills that we still have to look at how they get applied. How do we apply AI in a way that it helps humanity move forward and doesn't harm us? AI, just like any of the preceding technology in terms of computing, can only calculate. It can only take information that's fed into it. And if we get to the point where we start to believe that AI can emote,
right,
and that then it can emote in a moralistic way, in a way that moves humanity forward, then I think we lose some of the younger generation who depends too much on the ability of AI to do things that appear to be human.
Right.
Could lose some of the emotional input that I think is really important for us to move forward as the human race. We can't replace ourselves with AI. and I say this with my son being an AI engineer, but he's very much aware of the need to use AI ethically.
Right.
And I think there's still a lot of questions about how do we do that. And, that's where the guardrail is going to have to come in so that it enhances humanity as opposed to holding it back.
Yeah, I was talking to a radiologist in the Philippines last night, and the comment I made, because we were talking about how can you use AI for betterment, and how can, especially you shoot, like you said, they calculate, right?
Right.
And radiology and DICOM images and stuff like that, to look at what most radiologists that have been practice their craft that have 10 years, they know when to look at pull something up on the screen or the box. They know what the diagnosis is.
Right.
But there's certain those esoteric or those on-off that I think AI will be able to help and augment, not replace. I mean, there's very famous Koslas, famous for saying that we won't need radiologists, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years from now. But I think that having leveraging AI and going back to the workplace, there's maybe less people. I mean, Salesforce mentioned they're laying off 4,000 people because of I think it was AI. We have Dreamforce this week in San Francisco, which is a San Francisco-based company that if you're just doing certain things, you don't need some entry-level positions. Can you imagine if your son has an expertise in AI, but we told people for the last 10, 15 years, get a job as a coder and you'll always have a job. Guess what? That's not the case.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. So how do you predict that? And what are the future jobs that are out there that we can't even think of? Is really a challenge. So it's the other thing that you look at, if you look at evolution of technology or change, it usually takes 20, 25 years. I know Al Gore invented the internet in 1972, but AOL and CompuServe and others really brought it to the masses. I mean, we're old enough to remember you go to a movie theater and you got AOL little tape things you throw in the whatchamacallit. So it will take another 10, 15 years, maybe not 20 or 25. But I was on an earlier call today and they said, AI is like electricity. We're not going to say, oh, is this AI built in or whatever. Do we ask if it has electricity in our computers or how we're talking? No. It's obsequious. That's a big word I can't spell. In that,
right. So to your point, John and Mike, it's a utility, right? And
utility,
about the ethics of AI or ethical AI, it's how do we go about balancing profit and purpose?
Mm-hmm. And right now things are moving so fast. That right now we're sitting here talking about AI, which is the flavor of the day.
Right. It could be quantum computing next, or organic.
We got quantum computing is coming down the road, which will be able to calculate 1,000 times as fast as a supercomputer can right now.
Right.
So how will that impact who we are and what we do and how we do it and where we do it?
And John, for you as a business leader and put on your social responsibility hat, I guess the question begs, how can business leaders prioritize the social responsibility while also driving the growth and profitability that their shareholders are seeking?
Yeah. And Nicole, that's one that I cannot answer. I wish I could, but that is one I cannot answer. I'll tell you what if we look at what's happening with technology, I'm in the process now of writing a second book. And I talked to my son about what I was writing. And he said, well, and about the research that I needed to do, he said, well, you can use AI to do X, Y, and Z. I went in and essentially told AI what I was doing, what I wanted to come out with, et cetera. It came back to me with some fantastic thoughts and ideas.
Right.
my fear is that often people will take those thoughts and ideas and have AI write the book.
It's like papers, right? In college.
Instead of, but what I want to do is use AI as my research team. I don't have to have 10 people out there doing research.
Exactly.
When I can use AI to do that. So I see the value of AI, but I also see the dangers in too much dependence on AI, quantum computing, anything that really seems that it can replace the human input. We still need humans to really think. Computers don't think. AI doesn't think.
Yeah, but they mimic, right? I mean, I don't know, but they don't. I love what you brought up as far as emotion and the like, the human factor, right? So I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn and currently on the Microsoft board, and he has created a digital twin. He's prolific in writing. He's involved with a lot of videos and talks and speeches and whatever. And if you get a chance, I recommend our listeners go up because it is pretty scary. Reid Hoffman interviewing Reid Hoffman. And if you can try to tell the difference now, part of it, the first version was kind of more mechanical and stuff like that.
Right.
But as it gets to the version 5.6.0 or whatever the number is, it is pretty emotional. I mean, in their interaction that you barely can tell the difference, right? Yeah. And this is what scares Hollywood, right? I think Norwood just came out as an actress. Yeah. And so, it's a whole thing that you said, I used to be in the acting field, and it's like saying, if you don't necessarily have to know the Greek tragedy or the comedy or whatever, or been through something that, is poignant, that suddenly, gets you the Oscar, you crying, but if you can fake it,
right,
you can. And so can AI, taking all those data points and the different, versions or whatever in 10, 15 years ago, fake it enough? I mean, we've all seen things on whether it's a political or comedy or, on, like I said, the Reid Hoffman, it's hard to tell. And I remember seeing an AI back in when Russia invaded Ukraine, and they showed an AI of Zelensky surrendering to Putin that sent the stock market down, impacted people's lives. I imagine people in Ukraine were going crazy. Now the cycled it out within 12 or 10 hours or 10 minutes, doesn't matter. But it has an impact of what we're doing, And I think work has to change. I know some other folks that I met with last week, they working in AI, right? And big data. And they were telling me they're working with banks and they're working with CPA firms, right? And what usually took 2 to 4 weeks, to close out books, they can do it in 2 hours.
Yes.
Because that goes back to what you said, John, the big data, calculate, right? Yes. And something like that, I think maybe it should be able to do so we have more time to free up our time so we can read your book.
And to that point, hope between us, right, John? You had eloquently articulated in the book, hope isn't just wishful thinking; it's the active choice.
It's an active choice
in our collective ability to create positive change, even in the face of significant challenges. Tell us some more about how you went about just framing up the overall theme of the book, and some of the things that comes to mind is around the starting with empathy, building bridges. I mean, Mike has shared with us about AI and some of the evolutionary steps that's ongoing, but also the actions that we need to take collectively and how we sustain to our commitment. Just walk us through your framework and your thought process without giving away all the secret sauce that we want our listeners to get the book. Hope lives between us. But John, do share with us what inspired you and what are some of the key takeaways our readers should have.
Well, like I said, I've been around a long time. And 40 some years ago, and Mike, you'll remember this. when the big emphasis around being lean and mean in
Yep.
corporations in the early 80s came around, and started cutting out layers of management. Okay, we don't need 3 layers of management to manage this 50 people. We can do it with one manager.
Right.
And I saw something begin to happen at that point where I said, we're going to become subservient to the profit motive. And I think that's part of what Mike was talking about earlier. Then I started to look at what some of the things were that were happening around that. And it was becoming less and less people focused in organizations and more, I'll say, being counter focused. I don't want to, I used to work with
being counter. Yeah, I know.
but it was the human element was starting to disappear, and I started to see that happen in other areas of human interactions. And part of my training has been in culture and organizational change. And many people think of me as a DEI expert because I did that for so many years, and I am a DEI expert, but essentially I'm a change expert.
Right.
I understand change in organizations, and I understand that change occurs with people. It goes back to some of the things I talked about a little bit earlier. Creating that shared vision, et cetera. But anyway, I also saw that if we kept going in the direction that we were going as a nation, both business-wise and politically, that we were going to come to a point where things were going to become so dehumanized that people were going to say, enough of this, we can't deal with this anymore. We're going to have to change the way we look at ourselves and others. That is why I finally decided to write the book. I had talked about these things in different ways too. I talked about the guy my mentee, who was an executive with Ralph Lauren. But there were other people who I talked to about this who kept saying, you've got to write a book. You've got to write a book. The first one to tell me that was back in about 1990. I was living in Miami at the time, a realtor that we had. She listened to what I had to say. She said, you've got to write a book. and she's one of the people that I acknowledge in the book as one of the people who got me to do it. So I finally decided, I'm going to do this because as one of the presidents of Morehouse University once said, he told the young men that each one of us comes into this world with a song to sing. The tragedy is that most of us die without ever having sung our song. I knew what my song was to sing. And this book is my song. Like I said, I'm working on a second book, which is just sort of a further elaboration of what I see in the world, based around some of the work that was done by Montesquieu, Rousseau, etc. Things that we've never really internalized, the rights of man. You look at our Constitution, we incorporate a lot of those things, but we have never really lived up to it. And so I figured it was time for me to put my thoughts around what we can be. And that's what my book is all about. It's about the fact that we are not dependent on each other nor independent of each other, but we're interdependent. And that what happens to you happens to me. When you hurt, I hurt. When you feel joy, I feel joy. You become less, my world becomes less. And one of the things that I think I probably say this in the book is that my thoughts around this are not altruistic, but in many ways they're selfish, because it's about realizing that by making everyone's world better, you make your own world better. And I said we can't keep going down the same rabbit holes. 9/11. I happen to have been an executive with the major corporation in New York in 9/11, looking out of the window at the World Trade Center collapse. And for probably 2 or 3 weeks, everybody became friends and buddies and collaborating, realizing that, our common fate, that we had a common fate. One of the women who was killed in the building was a woman I'd ridden to a meeting with just a few weeks before. She had just been made a managing director, 45 years old. Another gentleman had just come up from Texas, who ran the office in Texas, got killed in the building. But then what is our response? Our response is to start a war that kills hundreds of thousands of people. Instead of looking at, why did this happen? What could have been done? Why would somebody hate enough to do this? And one of the things that I've always tried to counsel people on, both in my consulting and in my personal mentoring, coaching, et cetera, is to look at the causation. What is fundamental to the issue that you're looking at? Instead of reacting to a particular situation, look at what it is that caused that situation and how do you solve it in a positive way. And essentially that's what my book is all about, is about beginning to, realizing that we don't live in a perfect world. We're not perfect people. None of us are perfect people, but it's about becoming better. And if I become better and you become better and you become better, we all become better. And if we do that, then we will come closer to perfection and closer to the cosmos. And one of the things I talk about is the fact that cosmos doesn't mean the universe. It means the universe in balance. And we need to come closer to a universe in balance where we're not constantly tearing the world apart and tearing each other apart, but finding out ways to strengthen society, business, personal relationships. That's sort of the genesis of the book.
And John, this is a perfect note for us to end on. Hope lives between us. Because to your point, it's our fundamental belief and reflection that we should have that hope isn't just an individual emotion.
Right.
It's something we create together through our relationships and shared commitment to each other's success.
Right.
Any final words for our viewers and listeners, John?
Yeah, in chapter 2 of my book, Choosing Interdependence Over Individualism, I quote Bud Schulberg, who said, "Isn't everyone a part of everyone else?" And then I say, harmony is the blending of unique voices to produce a richer tone than any single voice is capable of producing. So if our goal is to live together in harmonic community, where does that leave our devotion to rugged individualism? As a unique individual, why can't you be independent of others? And I say this deserves exploration. Then I talk about how we are interdependent as opposed to independent or dependent. So it's all about how we connect to each other and the fact that we are a part of each other. I think 400 years ago, John Donne, or am I losing? John Donne said it very well when he said, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." You know, many people see it as a poem but it was really John Donne's observation. He was a minister who had heard the bells toll for someone's funeral, and he decided to write about what that meant for him and for the rest of the world. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. So if you move one clod of earth on England's shore, you change the entire course of history. So everything that we do, every interaction that we have, the interaction that we're having here changes the world.
Absolutely.
John? I would say amen before Nicole signs us out. Amen. And also the music tone that came throughout this conversation of music. And as Cohen was saying, hallelujah, right? And, and the impact that has on our lives, whether it's at the workplace or on personality, and that, yeah, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Yeah. And I think that, you know, as we are, you know, I don't know if we did well in science, but, you know, as far as understanding that we can either, you know, go at this or we can go like that, right?
Yes.
And it's been a pleasure, John, talking to you. I'm looking forward to a future conversation, whether here or online, or, you know, to talk to you and hopefully meet you someday, because you've been very inspirational. Thank you for all your mentorship. Thank you for all the positive impact you've made on this world. And it's been a treat for our listeners and watchers. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Nicole.
And John,
person for having been here.
Absolutely. And John, thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us today. To our listeners,
thank you.
Sharing our stories creates a bridge between generations. It allows us to connect on a deeper level, as we've just seen and heard the conversation with John Kirksey, and more importantly about hope lives between us, because it truly does. As we embrace the power of our stories to build meaningful relationships and create a more connected world. Let's continue to navigate the tapestry of life. Remember that every chapter offers new lessons, opportunities, and connections. Embrace the journey, cherish the moments, and continue to learn, grow, and inspire. Until next time, do get that book, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.